I believe there's some hope for you after all, Mr. Spock.
The audience relating to the character made sense to me on a lot of levels. The character, for kids, little kids, the character had a certain kind of magic. He was this other who had certain special powers. He could do things that humans couldn't do. He knew things that humans didn't know. So for kids, and he looked interesting. So for kids, I used to get hundreds and hundreds of letters from kids where they drew pictures of Spock. Here's my picture of you, you know. It was really kind of sweet.
I am what I am, Leila. And if there are self-made purgatories, then we all have to live in them.
Adolescents, teenagers, I think really related to this struggle to figure out who you are, how do you function in the world, how these emotional turmoil that goes on in kids and young people. And Spock was experiencing that, and they identified with that. They knew what that was. Should I be cool? Should I be angry? Should I be hot? Should I be cold? Should I be indifferent, or should I be aggressive? What kind of person should I be? And Spock seemed to have a fix on that. He had found a way to deal with those questions, in spite of the fact that he was not really acceptable amongst humans totally, because he was strange. He was not totally acceptable among Vulcans because he was part human. He was a mongrel. People identified with that, understood that.
Didn't quite get that, Mr. Sound.
Nothing, sir.
Repeat it.
I was suggesting that Mr. Spock could probably translate it for you, sir.
I assume you're complimenting Mr. Spock on his ability to decode.
I'm not sure, sir.
Well, here's one thing you can be sure of, mister. Leave any bigotry in your quarters. There's no room for it on the bridge. Do I make myself clear?
You do, sir.
And then there was the humor. There was some fun stuff happening between myself and DeForest Kelley and Bill Shatner. One of the best moments that they ever gave me to play was at the end of an episode where we were traditionally standing on the bridge in a kind of a coda, kind of a wrap-up of tonight's story. And I'm standing next to Bill Shatner, who's sitting in the captain's chair, and he turns to me and said something like, "Spock, there's hope for you. You're getting more human all the time." And Spock says, "Captain, I see no reason to stand here and be insulted," and leaves. It was a wonderful moment which defined the relationship and defined the whole Spock character's existence and his attitude about himself.
The Horta is a remarkably intelligent and sensitive creature with impeccable taste.
Because she approved of you.
Really, Captain, my modesty
Does not bear close examination, Mr. Spock. I suspect you're becoming more and more human all the time.
Captain, I see no reason to stand here and be insulted.
The I Am Not Spock book was really, I think, a very interesting read. It was simply a mistake to put that title on it. The timing was unfortunate. There was no Star Trek product being made. There was some question about would there be Star Trek, would there not be Star Trek. There was some rumors going around that I was in a conflict with Paramount, which was true. And the assumption that the jump that people made was there's no Star Trek being done because Nimoy won't do Spock. Well, that wasn't really the case.
I made an error in my computations. Oh, this could be an historic occasion.
When I wrote this book, which really was an attempt to tell the stories that I'm sitting here telling you, it was an attempt to explain how the character was developed. It was an attempt to explain which of the episodes that I thought were the most meaningful for Star Trek and for Spock. It was an attempt to talk about all the aspects of my work that led up to Spock and how you applied acting techniques to create a character like Spock and how you work with the writers and the directors and so forth. It talked about my favorite episodes.
Your pulse is 242. Your blood pressure is practically non-existent. Assuming you call that green stuff in your veins blood.
The readings are perfectly normal for me, Doctor. Thank you. And as for my anatomy being different from yours, I am delighted.
I said very specifically, if I were given the opportunity to play any character ever on television, I would have chosen Spock. And, but there was also a story about meeting a lady at an airport who had a child And she recognized me. The child was a little boy, about 8 years old, and she marched him over in front of me, and she said, "Look who's standing right in front of you." The little boy looked at me, and there was no recognition. She said, "This is your favorite character. You watch him all the time on television." Nothing. She said, "This is Mr. Spock." He couldn't see it. I thought this is really interesting because I was not Spock standing there. And what she really meant to say, she was using a kind of shorthand, what she really meant to say was, this is the actor who plays Spock. But she said, "This is Mr. Spock," and he couldn't make that connection.
You never told me if you had another name, Mr. Spock.
I thought that was interesting, and I wrote a chapter which I called "I Am Not Spock." I'm a Jewish guy who grew up in Boston. I have a brother. Spock at that time didn't have one. Both of my parents were humans. I never visited Vulcan, and I don't have pointed ears, and I don't wear that costume. Here's how the whole thing happened. Here's how we built that character. But it's not really me. We're different. And I'm emotional, and I can get angry and yell and scream and cry and do all those things that humans do that Spock would not do.